up, Clean Freaks? Hank Balch here in studio, back with Jeffrey Paquet, our water quality expert in 2024 here Beyond Clean. Jeff, welcome back to this wonderful series.
Thanks, Hank. Excited to be here.
So gap analysis. We talked about risk assessment and risk analysis a couple of episodes ago, and we kind of jumped into like, what is this? Who's responsible for these things? And maybe that's a good place to start when we're talking about gap analysis. What is that in the context of this water quality conversation that we've been having?
Right. So gap analysis is a technique that you use in organizations to basically identify where you are, where you want to be, and then the gap is the distance between there. And then it helps you formulate a plan and the steps to get from where you are to where you want to be. And you probably aren't likely to find gap analysis necessarily in ST 108, but it's basically what you're doing. And I use it as a tool in my organization and with my customers. It's just, you can't get to where you're going unless you know where you're starting from. So in its basic sense, that's what gap analysis is. It's just identifying that roadmap.
And I guess you're comparing it to something that we talked about earlier in the series, that water quality plan or that goals, to say this is where we want to go, as you said, and then this is how far we are, from that. This is the gap. Is this something that that facility should be doing on a quarterly basis, on an annual basis? What kind of direction can you give on that?
Right. So when you do your survey of your department, which we talked about in a previous episode as part of developing your water quality management plan and any policies that fall out of that, that's kind of when you're doing the gap analysis. Your one of your major goals is to become ST 108 compliant. Okay. This is how I use water. This is the equipment I have. What's missing? What has to change? And that's how you identify what your gap is, by getting your current state view there in that survey. And then, as part of developing your water quality management plan, you're going to put together that roadmap of getting from point A to point B. And that may be years, it may be months, it may be days. It just kind of depends on the mountain you have to climb and what type of money and resources that's going to take. And so this is, so in terms of how frequently do you revisit this, is that you just need to think of your plan as this ongoing living document in which you're trying to narrow the gap between where you want to go and where you want to be. And then you have to understand that as you move through time, your goals are going to change. So all of a sudden you were almost where you wanted to be, but all of a sudden you've changed what you're doing and it's brought in some new things, and it may have set your final state out further than where you were just before that happened. So it's a living, the whole process is a living process in which you continuously update it, determine where you are, determine where you're going. It's always a journey. We don't stop that journey until they put us 6 feet under, is pretty much how it works in healthcare, right?
That's right. The road goes on forever and the party never ends, I think is one of the songs out there. I could have asked this question on the episode of risk assessments, but I'm going to ask it now, so that we can look at both of those two things in tandem. And this is maybe a soft skill question for you, but if it's facilities leader, if it's a sterile processing leader, anytime we surface gaps in our current process to our administrators, there's a little bit of fear and trembling, because the question could be back from them: so are you saying today that our water is not safe? Are you saying today that we are not compliant with current industry guidelines? And to your point, if we're doing this correctly, we're going to be saying that a lot, because there's going to be a lot of gaps. If we're looking at all the gaps out there, we're laying it down, we're writing it on paper, and we're putting it up, to the CEO or to the COO and saying, yeah, this is where we're falling short. How do we have those conversations in a way that, it is keeping that vision of we're moving forward, but we're not there yet?
Right. So it's important to remember, going back to the first episode with the multidisciplinary team, is that you have a management representative. And part of your job in bringing that management representative on is to find an ally, so that this person is going to, obviously they're going to be a member of the team. They're going to get bought into what the team is doing, and they're going to be supportive of the team, and they're the ones that are supposed to help make the resources available. So the way you're going to manage your gaps is by risk analysis, identifying what those gaps pose as a risk to you now, and how you're going to manage that risk to your quality process. And that's the discussion you have, to say, okay, well, we're not there yet. So the way we need to manage this until we get there is to implement this strategy with this process. Okay, there's a cost to that. So you are going to spend money now until you can spend the money later. So the quicker we spend the money for later, now we don't have to spend this other money. But that's kind of how that works.
I'm going to state the obvious here as we move to a close, but it's in our best interest, I guess, to do the gap analysis ourselves instead of letting a surveyor come in during the accreditation period and find the gaps for us.
Well, the thing about the risk analysis is, if you've already identified the gaps and the surveyor has an issue with that, you already have shown that you've invested in it, you've identified the problem, you're working through the problem, this is how you're managing the problem, and this is the end date of when we're going to have this corrected. And until then, this is how we're going to manage that. And once you've done the risk assessment, there's not going to be a survey in the world that's going to fail you in a survey if you've addressed the problem.
Yeah, because they want to see the plan. They want to see the awareness. They want to see the plan. They want to see the roadmap. And speaking of roadmaps, that's what we're going to bring you back here for the next episode to talk about. Okay, we've got all this aligned. How do we actually implement this? How do we execute on these gaps and these opportunities now that we laid out? So if you're not already hooked on this next episode coming up, I hope that hooks you right now, because we're going to be talking about putting all these things into practice here with Jeffrey Paquet, our water quality expert here on Beyond Clean. So, Jeff, thank you again for coming into the studio with us today.
Thank you very much.
All right, and that's going to do it for this episode. And like we tell you each and every week here at Beyond Clean, until we see you again for the next one, keep fighting dirty.